Welcome to What's Your Edge, a series of Vision Edge marketing podcasts dedicated to helping you use data, analytics, process, and measurement to create a competitive edge for you and a superior experience for your customers. I'm your host, Laura Patterson, President of Vision Edge Marketing. Today's conversation explores how a lean process improvement initiative, originally launched to address patient complaints about long wait times, evolved into something much more: a deeply embedded customer-centric culture grounded in customer value and customer centricity, and a move away from random acts of efficiency toward a systematic, measurable approach to customer experience. Stephanie Collins, CEO of Austin Retina, a practice that has been serving patients here in Austin since 1979, joins us today as our guest for What's Your Edge. Stephanie has been with the organization for 25 years, rising through the ranks to lead the practice through significant growth. The practice has grown from a single provider to 19 physicians and nearly 300 employees, and recently it became a part of Cencora, a global leader in pharmaceutical and medical supplies distribution. Stephanie, I'm looking forward to learning how Austin Retina reframed time as a critical dimension of value, how you operationalize customer centricity, and how you measure the impact of customer value on growth, loyalty, and performance. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura, so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are delighted to have you. And I want to start with the moment that really catalyzed change for Austin Retina. In 2015, Austin Retina initiated a lean process. And you told me that one of the primary triggers was patient feedback, that patients felt like the practice didn't value their time, that they were being treated like a number. I've had that feeling. I imagine most everyone listening has experienced this feeling. That's not a new feeling, unfortunately. In fact, nationally, studies suggest that patients spend roughly 11 to 18 minutes just waiting to be seen in a doctor's office. And when you add travel and disruption to the workday, researchers estimate about $89 billion a year in lost time due to medical visits. It's an staggering amount of money. So let's wind the clock back, and where patients were often in the office for like 3 hours. And I know these patients often see their physicians, every 4 to 6 weeks, because they have, critical needs that need to be attended to frequently. So that's a pretty significant time commitment. And we can easily see why the initial goal of the Lean Initiative was straightforward: shorten wait time. Mm-hmm. So congratulations, because you achieved your goal and you reduced wait time from 3 hours to 90 minutes. That's awesome. Take us back to that time where you were hearing from patients that what were they saying that made you realize we have to do something different? Was there a specific story or a piece of feedback that made the leadership team say, we cannot continue this way?
Yeah, great question, Laura. When I think back about that time, to your point earlier, I think we were really focused on, man, we just can't keep our patients in this clinic for 3 hours, right? They felt like they were a number, they were getting moved through like cattle, people would say. And so when I kind of, think back to that time in 2015, something that kind of like sticks out to me specifically was about the way patients said being in our clinic that long and having to wait really just made them feel maybe that they weren't being valued, right? And so I kind of started listening to that. We were collecting feedback, digitally and on paper and from patient reports. And so we really kind of began hearing this consistent feedback that patients felt like they were being processed rather than actually, cared for as an individual. And so I remember talking to a patient one day, having asking him to fill out a paper form and giving us some feedback. And, he was very kind, but he'd been there for a long time. And he said, I know you guys are all working very hard to care for all of us, but to me, it just kind of feels like you don't value my time. Like it doesn't matter to you how long I've been here. And so that kind of really stuck with me, in that moment. And so when we think about all the patients, to your point earlier, is that we do see our patients every 4 to 6 weeks. And many of them, we are managing, kind of a long-term chronic condition that doesn't have a cure. So that comment was very eye-opening to me. And so, when they're here with us every 4 to 6 weeks for many years to come, and they're spending 3 hours in our office, it just adds up and becomes a tremendous burden to the patient themselves. So that was kind of the moment where we kind of all like rallied together as a leadership team and realized, this lean initiative is not really about, focusing on being more efficient and just reducing that wait time. It's really about making sure that we are looking at the patient holistically, we're respecting them, being empathetic to their needs as well, and really being, making sure that we're treating them with, dignity. So we couldn't continue operating that way. We totally understood that. And so we kind of just unintentionally signaled, to our leadership team that that we need to make sure that the patient's time is valued, and that's what we're focused on. So that realization is really what pushed us to take a bold action and kind of pursue lean and move forward and really focus on the patient.
I love the distinction between process versus cared for, because I think, I can relate to where I have been in various doctor's offices, and not only doctor's offices, but other places where I do feel like I have been
Absolutely.
processed. Um,
Absolutely.
anyway, I personally believe that time is our most precious asset. How did you and your team come to frame the problem, not just as this operational issue, but as a patient or customer value issue?
Yeah, I think I mean, as we started kind of digging in and looking into these long visit times, we kind of realized that the real question wasn't just about how do we make the process faster. It's really just about, are we delivering a true value to our patients? And that kind of, reshift in our mindset and thinking about it through the patient's lens was really important. So yes, we wanted to reduce waste, to help from a cost, perspective, and to reduce redundancies in the process. But we never wanted to do that at the expense of the quality of care or the relationship we have with our patients, right? So again, kind of focusing on the patient's lens, helped, kind of frame the problem. It helped us focus on improving the flow, eliminating waste, and adding value back to the patient while still protecting all of their elements of care that mattered the most. And it really kind of allowed us to design these improvements that were more meaningful, very patient-centered, and ultimately more sustainable. Because that's the other thing, is you have to make sure that you don't just do them, you can sustain them. This is who you become, and this is the organization you're gonna, continue to be. So it has to also be sustainable and not, kind of a quick fix Band-Aid and move on.
I love the fact that this idea that you stepped into your customer's shoes. I think we all need to do that on a very regular basis. In our work, we define customer value as the balance between what customers receive and what they must give up, such as time or effort or money or risk to obtain the value. For many customers, time is one of the most precious currencies. From your perspective, when did you begin to see time not just as a scheduling issue, but as a core component of the value proposition Austin Retina offers its patients?
I mean, I think, the turning point for me was recognizing that, like, time, as you said, is extremely important, and it's really deeply emotional for many people, right? It has many meanings for everybody, and what that time and that value actually means. So it's kind of tied to, patient and people's autonomy, their sense of control, their quality of life. And in retina care, many of our patients already feel like they've kind of lost their control, right? They're chronic conditions, they're very sight threatening. So their vision, their health, their schedule revolves around all of these treatments for injections and their follow-ups coming into our office. So when we began mapping out the patient journey and what that looked like, we realized that if we could give them time back, we were then restoring some of that control for them. And that's kind of when it became clear that time wasn't just a scheduling matter. It's a core part of the value proposition and the value for the patient.
It's an interesting idea about giving time back because obviously we cannot store time. We can't get it back, so to speak. We certainly can't give it to others. It's a very perishable resource. So I love the fact that think in terms of how can we give time back. You started with this lean initiative around the idea of what can we do to reduce wait times, but it evolved over time into something a lot deeper. And it sounds like it was a cultural shift toward the patient, or what we will call, customer centricity. At what point did you and your team recognize this is no longer just a process improvement project, but it's really reshaping the culture of our organization, of our practice?
It's interesting. We started this lean training, and it was almost kind of an immediate kind of response. So for us, kind of the moment we realized that this has grown, kind of beyond process improvement and had truly become kind of a cultural transformation, is when patients just started coming up on their own, and we began hearing things from them like, "I don't know what you're doing differently, but keep it up." It would be some super simple, trial or something we were doing, but they could already feel the impact, the excitement from the staff, right? So those kind of spontaneous comments from the patients were just really validating for the patient. I mean, for the staff and for us to keep going, right? They're noticing we're doing something super small and they're already noticing. So that showed us that, that patients weren't just experiencing a shorter visit, but they were feeling a real improvement in how they were cared for and their experience with us. So what was just as meaningful, though, I will point out, was what happened kind of internally as well. So those patients, as they started to notice the changes, our staff got re-engaged in a way that we hadn't seen in a really long time. They began bringing forward new ideas. They were suggesting areas of ways that we could streamline and improve the experience for everyone. So for the patient, the physician, and themselves. And you could really feel the excitement building, this kind of sense of like we're accomplishing something very important all together. And so that kind of combination of patient appreciation, staff enthusiasm is when we really knew we weren't just simply adjusting workflows, we were reshaping our culture around the value of time, reducing frustration for everyone, and creating a better experience just across the board.
And, it is amazing how something so intangible, right, and ambiguous could have such concrete results. So it's an excellent point about how the process helped reshape the culture. And we often talk about the need to operationalize customer centricity. That is, to move from slogans about being customer focused to embedding customer value into process, metrics, and decision making. What were some of the concrete operational changes that signaled to your patients, we heard you, and we're changing how we work to respect your time? And, Stephanie, how did you make those changes stick so they became the way we do things here rather than just sort of a one-time initiative?
Yeah, I think when you think about, reframing your process, I mean, there's definitely things where you have to, create a process and then kind of stick to it and reevaluate it along the time. But some of the big things, from a process perspective is really just kind of standardizing some things. So standardizing, when we room a patient, what their workflow is going to be like from a diagnostic perspective. So they get all of the necessary testing they need to get, and they're not making extra steps, back and forth between things. Reviewing patient dashboards and metrics so the staff can anticipate bottlenecks and improve processes and keep them from happening. So, looking at issues in real time and not, retrospectively. I mean, while there's a benefit for both, I think if you can get real time information to make a change in the moment, that's always going to be the most impactful. Cross-training team members so they're not siloed in their one department. That gives you more flexibility and keeps the patients moving smoothly. Redesigning kind of the appointment template so that it's really accurate and reflecting the true time that's needed for the different visit types and the different patients who are very unique. And then we also have huddles every morning, so including the physicians or maybe just the entire care team themselves, and everybody's just getting aligned on the day's flow and what the expectations for the day are, and keeping that communication up. And I think what made these changes stick was that we just embedded them into the daily management. I mean, they're just kind of things that at first were kind of required and these were, things that we were going to do, but now people really enjoy doing them and sharing new ideas and making sure everybody's on the same page. So they didn't become, they weren't just projects anymore. They were these expectations. And then again, as soon as the patients started noticing the shorter visit times, things were going smoother, they were having a better experience, the team just became more committed and excited to keep going.
I love the concept of huddles, and we encourage our customers to implement huddles, daily huddles, if at all possible. I think they make a real difference in how the day goes, right, for the team as well as the customer. And I think you made a really powerful point about making changes expectations. We often emphasize that customer-centric growth depends on being able to define, to measure, and to monitor customer value. And we've written a lot about customer value metrics and about how they facilitate customer-centric growth and about the importance of identifying the variables that matter most to your customers, like time or access or outcomes or the relationship and so on. So, I want to turn the conversation to the topic of measures. Stephanie, what measures and metrics are you using to track whether you're really delivering on the value proposition of time? For example, do you track average total time visit or wait time by stage or on time starts or visit variability? And Have you adopted or adapted any form of customer value metrics beyond the measure of time, such as combining time, satisfaction, and clinical outcomes into more of a composite view of value?
Yeah. So I think always, we always know that measure what matters, right? And these measurements absolutely change over time, not, differing what you're focused on. But, I think truly understanding, that, whether you're delivering value, you have to measure that based off of either the visit or what matters most to the patient, right? And so this is kind of some of the things that we focus on today from an operational and patient experience, just to kind of get a clear picture of both efficiency and patient perception. So today we're measuring total visit time, or what in lean is called lead time. So that's from check-in to check-out, and that's that 90 minutes you mentioned earlier. That's an organizational average for us. Certain visits and other doctors or locations might vary from that, but that's kind of our goal, is to get our lead time to be 90 minutes for everybody. Our wait time by task. So as the patient is moving, throughout the process, what is that wait time that they are looking at before they can get in there? So the moment they check in, how long are they waiting from check-in to getting to the technician to be worked up and moved through the process, and so on. And then also the total task time. So when we're, working up the patient or we're setting them up for a procedure, what does that task time look like, so that we can understand that and see if we need to make any tweaks through that. The throughput of the clinic and by the physician. So we, look at this to monitor the balance, the capacity of what the physician and the team can do, and the flow across the organization. And then, of course, most importantly is always our patient satisfaction score. Anything that we do here always has to measure back to the patient satisfaction score. And so, running that through Google or NPS, or, we do both, but however you can do that is really just kind of tells us really how the patient feels about their experience. So everything always has to measure back by that. But, kind of looking at these measures together, we're able to evaluate not just the speed, but, predictability, consistency, the overall patient value. And it really, helps us pinpoint where the improvements, can be made, where will make the biggest difference, and areas that maybe we need to continue to focus on.
Yeah, not to make people sound like a product, because
Right.
obviously we're not. But a lot of the things you're talking about are things that we work with our manufacturing customers to address, sort of that white space when you're moving from, we call them task to task, but from stage to stage, and in your world, and I'm sure some of the people listening have had this experience. You come into the waiting room, you check in, and you sit and you wait, and then someone comes and gets you, and they take you to another room where you sit and wait, and that's kind of like a white space. Why am I
Yep.
in this, this sort of black hole kind of thing? And this is true of whether you are in a service organization or in an organization that actually has real products at the end of the line. Being cognizant of all of that, all those different points along the way, and the time that each of those points takes. And I think, it's a meaningful measure. So thanks for sharing those metrics. I'm sure it will be helpful to people listening, to give them some ideas for some things they might want to use as they are measuring. We strongly believe that customer value delivers faster organic growth, and that organizations that explicitly manage and measure customer value tend to grow faster and more profitably. Stephanie, how has focusing on patient value, particularly this idea of time, influenced your organic growth? And have you seen changes in things like referral patterns or patient retention or word of mouth as a result?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the shift to, having shorter, more predictable visits has definitely had a tremendous impact on our growth and our reputation in the community. I mean, patients continually, tell us how much they appreciate not having to spend hours in our clinic, especially given how frequently they need to see us. So that patient, that positive experience, with them translates directly into word of mouth referrals, patients recommending us to families and friends because they generally feel cared for and respected. And also, it's really strengthened our relationship with our referring providers. We often hear that patients go back to their optometrist or their primary care provider and share how smooth and efficient their visit was. The kind of unsolicited feedback, really builds trust, reinforces the confidence referring doctors have to send us more patients. So I think making sure that we're continuing to do that, and they're, going back to do that, will help us with that organic growth. And then I think, operationally, the improvements in flow and visit time have enabled us to really care more for the patients in the community. when you're able to increase the efficiency without compromising the patient quality or the value, you are able to then also expand access. So that's incredibly important, and especially in a specialty like retina, where timely care can make all of the difference.
Yeah, those are all really good examples. Thank you. So, we often describe the value proposition as the customer-centric bridge between your business and your customer's definition of value. So, like in a specialty area like retina, patients are often with you for like a long time. You've talked about the fact that, they return every 4 to 6 weeks, and that's over years. And that creates not just a series of visits, but to your point, a relationship. They might be spending more time in your office than they spend with key members of their family.
Absolutely.
So, in what ways has your value proposition evolved as you've become more intentional about being patient-centric?
Yeah, I think consistency is really everything. I mean, to your point, these patients see us more, sadly, sometimes more than their family members, definitely more than they see most of their other providers. And so we really want to continue to reinforce that, value proposition by making sure that the patient feels that at every touch point and that they are cared for. So we try to set, clear, consistent expectations for everybody, for the staff and for the patient. So when we're scheduling patients, are we letting them know, how long their visit's going to be, what they're going to expect while they're here? Will they need to get dilated? Will they get treatment on the same day, right? Just really making sure everything is laid out for them and they know ahead of time. The front desk team is well trained to welcome patients warmly, keep them informed, right? They're not looking at their computer when a patient walks up. They are addressing them. They're making eye contact with them. They're acknowledging them. Our clinic teams are there to explain step by step so that patients understand what's happening next. So yes, you're moving from, check-in to the next room to maybe diagnostics, but making them understand like, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do with you, and this is what you're going to see next, right? And just kind of keeping them informed along the way. And then, of course, our physicians are always focused on, their empathy and the care for that individual patient as much as utilizing their expertise to treat their disease.
Yeah, I think we always like to refer to the front desk teams as the directors of first impressions, because they set the tone for everything that happens next. Um, And I couldn't agree more with you about the importance of every touch point in delivering on the value proposition and the promise, and especially, maintaining service quality. So how do you communicate and reinforce that value proposition, whether that's respect for time or quality of care, continuity, empathy across your touch points? That's a lot of different value propositions. So scheduling, front desk, clinical staff, physicians, where is the real value proposition when you are thinking about how to promote and differentiate Austin Retina?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are internally talking about, these metrics with everybody in our team. So we post them at our main office. They're in the central like staircase so everybody can see them. We have emails that go out that talk about all of these things, right? And so the entire team can see areas of, areas that we've done well in like patient NPS scores or positive feedback that we've received from the physicians, any constructive stuff of areas of, where we need to improve, right? And so they can celebrate these metrics. They receive them on a regular basis, sometimes even daily, so they can make, again, like immediate, changes and celebrate for themselves. And when the patients, provide this spontaneously during their visit, right? I mean, I have a physician that says every day that, they're appreciative of the care that I've given them, but they spontaneously talk about how wonderful the staff was, what their experience was like, and so it really just kind of highlights the whole organization's commitment to what we're doing here and valuing the patient and caring for them.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing what you've been able to do about the whole organization embracing this idea of the value proposition. We've written a lot about relationship strategy and brand equity, uh, as ways to they strengthen when organizations consistently deliver on what customers value and measure that delivery. Have you seen any evidence that your patient-centric approach has enhanced your brand equity, for example, and like how referring physicians talk about you or how patients describe you to others?
Yeah, I mean, patients, consistently mention the shorter and the smoother visits, to us spontaneously. I think they also tell their referring physicians and that they feel genuinely cared for while they're here, right? They enjoy interacting with the staff, with the physicians. They feel like they're getting, great care with us and that we are valuing, them as an individual. So I think when these patients begin describing, you as an efficient and compassionate organization, you really kind of start feeling like you're doing something right.
I would agree. And it certainly does take a lot of commitment to sustain a customer-centric culture. And it also requires leveraging best practices. So I'd love to hear what are some of the practices or mechanisms that have helped you and your team maintain alignment around customer or patient centricity.
Yeah, I think a few of them, that kind of keep us aligned and keep us talking about stuff is one we've talked about already, those daily huddles. So they are really focused on, expectations for the day, focused on the patient flow, any special things that are happening that day that we need to be aware of. So everybody's on the same page, from the get-go. Those, dashboards I mentioned earlier, they're out monthly, sometimes daily, depending on what we're talking about, and they're accessible to everybody in the organization. They're not just sent to the physicians or me or management, right? Anybody can see them and access them at any time. We do a lot of root cause reviews to make sure that anytime we have something like a spike in a patient visit time or even a bad patient review, that we are looking at that, asking questions and figuring out why this happened and seeing if we needed to tweak any of our processes. Our patient feedback loop, the reviews online, and, any indirect comments that they might give from us there, again, looking into those, having conversations with patients, figuring out what went well and what went wrong and how we can get better. And we actually now have a full-time patient experience manager who's focused on nothing but training new team members about lean, identifying waste, identifying areas of value for the patient, providing great customer service and what that looks like, and then also providing them feedback for areas where we can improve.
Those are great. And thank you for sharing them. Really great idea about the root cause reviews. And it's, I think every organization should have someone responsible for patient or customer experience, whether that's a manager or a whole team. But it's really good to have someone who is accountable, right? And who is watching the data and is helping the rest of the organization also be accountable. In terms of process and best practices, I'm curious about how you reinforce your process. Are there some thresholds or targets you manage to? For example, no patient should be in the clinic longer than X minutes, or Y% of visits must start within Z minutes of schedule time. Anything like that that you have set as gates.
Yes, absolutely. So we track and report on certain metrics and targets for each doctor and their team monthly. So we mentioned earlier, aiming for a 90-minute lead time, that check-in to check-out time for our patients. We measure an efficiency score that looks at the patient's time in clinic compared to our staffing ratio to make sure that, we're not over or understaffed, to make sure we're caring for the patient. And then, of course, always measuring these against patient satisfaction scores and feedback. We never want to make any changes to our process that will negatively impact the patient.
Great. I think that's a really valuable point that you're bringing up is about having these gates or performance targets that you're using as a way to gauge how you're actually doing, as opposed to just looking at data and knowing whether it's going up or down, but whether are you within operating parameters, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, many organizations say they want to be customer centric, but they really kind of struggle to, translate that aspiration into metrics, processes, and behaviors. And they end up with what we call random acts, random acts of customer experience or random acts of improvement or random acts of efficiency, as opposed to a disciplined, value-driven approach anchored in customer value metrics. So thinking about advice to your peers, how can leaders avoid random acts and instead build a systematic approach to customer value, similar to what you've done with lean and patient experience?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons we learned and that I share with folks when I talk to them is that you don't have to, and you actually absolutely cannot build a full systematic approach all at once. I mean, that's where I think a lot of organizations get stuck. It becomes very overwhelming, very daunting. They feel like they don't even know where to start, right? When you just try to design everything up front from the go. So I think what Lean taught us and what we learned along the way is that it's about the value of small intentional steps. So instead of chasing some big complex solution, we focused on small scale trials. We'll identify a specific problem, bring the right people together, brainstorm for a potential solution, and then we test it on a very small scale. And then we track the metrics closely. If it worked out, great. We refine it, we expand it, to other doctors, other teams across the organization. And if it didn't work, then we reassess. Why did it not work? Can we tweak it, or did we just have to, kind of kill it and say, this is just not going to work? But we learn quickly and we just kind of adjust. So those small scale trials of testing really helped us learn to avoid what we call, random acts, the one-off improvements that don't stick. I think by taking these small steps, they're very guided in data, pre and post, we're able to build a systematic approach over time. And the team then gains confidence because they can see the impact of each one of these incremental improvements, right? And the momentum is really what ultimately creates that cultural change. And the one thing I would also add is that a lot of the ideas for these changes actually come from the staff. So kind of that art of subsidiarity, the people who are closest to the problem actually have the best ideas on how to make these changes. So I think all of that kind of gets people excited and really kind of gets to the root of the problem and
Great
is a
tip
change.
on small scale trials. We highly recommend and encourage experimentation. So, in our conversation, I feel like we've made the case that customer centricity is not a project, it's a way of running your business. And it requires clarity about what customers value. It takes the right measures and a commitment to continuously aligning your processes and decisions. What routines or governance mechanisms help you keep customer value at the center of your strategy, operations, and growth?
So we've created a lot of internal training programs in our organization. So not just hard skills for how to, work up a patient or, perform certain diagnostic tests, but also, soft skills, or what I think people are calling relational skills now, right? So really spending a lot of time during their onboarding process and then future training programs to really focus on all of those things for great customer service and just great relational skills. We also have an internal certification program for lean. We've got a leadership development program that we focus on. We're big into recognition, highlighting their certifications and all of the things that they're working on. And then each physician and their team has a scorecard, as well as the leadership team as a whole, in our kind of weekly meetings, and then that we review and talk about. And then obviously we have quarterly strategic planning discussions for the future and how we're doing and all those things.
Those are some really great suggestions, and I'm sure people are taking notes and thinking about how they can employ some of those ideas in their own organizations. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with us. Based on your journey, what advice, here we go into the advice section, would you offer leaders who want to embed customer value, especially this idea of time, into their culture and operations? And what are some of your biggest lessons learned about listening to customers, redesigning processes, and measuring what matters?
I think my biggest advice would be to really listen. And I think sometimes that's really hard for us, in a leadership position that feel like maybe we maybe have all of the answers or kind of anticipate what's going to happen. But to sit back and really listen, even if it's going to be uncomfortable for you to hear. So listening to your staff, listening to your team, listening to your patients, especially your patients, they're going to tell you the truth long before anything else is going to happen, right? And so getting patients to tell you that will help you act on those and make those changes. Second, don't underestimate the cultural side of an operational change. I think it can have a negative or a positive impact, and hopefully you have a positive impact like we have. You can have the best processes in the world, but if your team doesn't believe in the why, they will not be sustainable. And third, I think, as I mentioned earlier, always measure what matters. So if you believe time is value, then you should track it relentlessly and keep focusing on it and making sure that you are delivering that value to your patient or your customer or whoever you're focusing on. And I guess lastly, I would say stay humble. Improvement is never finished. Customer value is always a journey. And the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you start to slip.
All very wise words. Thank you so much, because your story shows how listening to customers and treating time as a critical dimension of value and embedding customer-centric processes or practices into processes and metrics can transform both the experience and the business. And for those of you listening, Stephanie's experience at Austin Retina is a powerful reminder that time is one of the most important forms of customer value. When you make time visible, measure it, and design your processes around it, you move from random acts of customer experience to a disciplined customer-centric system that improves satisfaction, loyalty, and organic growth. because when you move beyond good intentions, you can begin to truly operationalize customer centricity. Stephanie, thank you so much for being a part of our community and for sharing your experience with us. And thank you to everyone listening for being a member and getting value from our episodes. We hope you find this episode of What's Your Edge helpful. Since 1999, Vision Edge Marketing has been helping our customers eliminate random acts, apply data, analytics, process, and measurement to accelerate growth, create customer value, and improve performance. We always welcome hearing from you. Thank you, Stephanie.